at the farm, living with the spirit here in Chiang Mai, Thailand, from our retreat center where we help people overcome any physical, emotional, or spiritual challenges to have a more abundant lifestyle and feel more freedom, more personal, emotional freedom. And today we have a special guest. We have a topic that we are deep diving into healthy food relationships. And welcome, John Smith.
Thank you very much. A real honor for me to be part of this program, and the little bit I know about what you guys do is really amazing. And I find it's very complementary to what I do as well. As you know, my name is John. I am originally from South Africa, Johannesburg. I've been living and working in Thailand for 4 years now, and currently living in Chiang Mai. We've been here for 1 year, and I'm a senior therapist at the Dawn Wellness Center and Rehab in Chiang Mai. And I basically work in the addiction or substance use disorder stream as well as the mental health and food, eating disordered or disordered eating. That seems to be, I wouldn't go as far as saying on the increase, but becoming more relevant now with regards to people recognizing it as a potential challenge and actually asking for help. So as I said, I'm very, very honored to be part of this discussion and hopefully just bring some insights in addition to what people already know.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate this because this is a topic that is widely spread and we see it in almost everyone who comes to work with us, even if it's online or at our center. So we appreciate that. So this will be a very interesting conversation, I feel. So Simba, do you have any question to begin with?
Oh, I have tons of questions. I was thinking maybe we can just start because, as I mentioned previous to the call, there's so many terms out there today. I'm obsessed, I'm addicted, I have to have this, I'm dependent. Maybe if you wouldn't mind like just laying out a baseline for what is it that we mean when we say addiction. So we have a terminology for the rest of the call and we kind of know what we're talking about.
Absolutely. Under the old dispensation with regards to terminologies, any behavior that I lost complete control over was considered addiction. And then the differentiation was made between chemical addiction and behavioral addiction. Chemical addiction would be all substances, not only the so-called drugs or alcohol, but sometimes even prescribed medication. We refer to them as psychoactive substances. So any substance that causes a change in brain function and a change in behavior that people lost complete control over. And by that, I mean when the behavior continues in spite of severe negative consequences. And then behavioral addictions would be something like gambling, pornography, where there is no specific chemical involved as such. And then over time, because of stigma and misunderstanding, the clinical terms and references have been amended. So today, from a clinical perspective, we refer to substance use disorder. And there can be cocaine use disorder, cannabis use disorder, alcohol use disorder. And from a clinical perspective, it implies that it's more than just the unwillingness to stop or having lost control, but there is a disorder that is developed in the brain. So again, from a clinical perspective, substance use disorder implies a change in brain function that could have a genetic or organic cause or could be the result of. There are many different ways we can maybe look at many different causes. We can maybe look at some of the possible causes. And then there is still this gambling disorder, for example, or whatever the behavior may be. But the emphasis is on it is a disorder and not just simply an addiction. The term addiction is still used quite widely, but from my side and at the Dawn particularly, we're moving more towards talking about a substance use disorder or behavioral disorders. And then there's also the idea of dependence. I think it's fairly commonly known that certain substances can form a physical dependence. And there is a misunderstanding with regards to that as well. So I'm just going to use a practical example. Opium, for that matter, which is connected to heroin or opiates, painkillers, or a risk factor that people can become physically dependent on the substance. Now, physical dependence is not the same as having a substance use disorder. Again, a simple example, somebody may go for major surgery and be prescribed opiates to help with pain relief. And the majority of those people over a period of time will develop a dependence on the substance, which implies when they stop using, not the substance, the medication at least, which implies when they stop using the medication, there could be withdrawal symptoms. And that can vary from cramping to sweating to vomiting more severely, but there are definite signs and symptoms of withdrawal. However, if the withdrawal is managed, they can get to a place where they can be free from that medication or the substance for that matter. There's no craving though. There's no desperation to return. Whereas a substance use disorder or addiction can include the physical dependence, but will also include the craving aspect. The fear of stopping using because of the pain of withdrawal and the intense craving to return. And we don't have time to explore too much about that, but it's actually different parts of the brain that are actually affected. The craving is more the pleasure and reward centers, because over time I trained my brain, I can have certain experiences or experience certain feelings by using, whereas the withdrawal is more the survival part of the brain has been triggered, because certain parts of the brain and the body became dependent on the substance or the medication, and that implies if I could just backtrack a bit, all functions in the brain and body, and I'm going to be very unscientific now, but it's still some measure of science in it. All functions in the brain and the body are determined by chemical and electrical processes. So there's a problem in the chemical levels, it impacts the electrical processes, which impacts the functioning. When it comes to substance dependence or disorder, with dependence particularly, the body learns to rely on the endogenous substance or chemical take into the body, and actually reduces its own production of chemicals to perform certain functions. So when I stop using, all of a sudden the body literally at some level goes into shock, and it can trigger the survival parts of the brain, which there is this major threat if I go into withdrawal. Then for some people, in addition to that, is the desperation to, there's no other way I can feel good, there's no other way I can escape from pain, there's no other way I can feel happy than to use. So again, in simple terms, it's almost like my own brain turns against me because I've conditioned it that way. So it will try to stop me. At least the irrational part of the brain, or the survival part, and the emotional part of the brain will try whatever it can to stop me from discontinuing for those reasons. Of course, the treatment approaches are very different. There may be less therapy involved with regards to withdrawal symptoms, but when it comes to craving, there are so many underlying factors that contribute to that as well. And that's a whole different treatment approach. And the main combination will be therapy, talk therapy, or teaching certain tools and skills. And also very often pharmacotherapy, where certain medications may be used to help the brain with the initial process at least. And from there, literally the repatterning of the brain to be able to move forward substance-free, so to speak, or medication-free. That's sort of the basic essence of addiction and dependence, or substance use disorder. If I can just add to that, when it comes to behavior, I'm going to make a statement that puzzles some people, but at the end of the day, it is less about being addicted to the substance. It is more about being addicted to the chemical reaction in the brain in response to the substance. It's the same with behavioral disorders or behavior addictions. I don't become addicted to gambling. I become addicted to the chemical reaction in my brain in response to the gambling, or the pornography, or food addiction for that matter, or eating disorders. So therapy is all about finding out what some of those underlying causes may be that created that need, and then helping the brain to literally reorganize itself and learning to function from a chemical, electrical point of view without the need to use the substances or the behaviors for that matter. So I hope I didn't confuse too many people, but those are sort of the basic principles with regards to the disorders.
No, that's very elaborate and very conclusive, and it's multifaceted. So I think that's a really good answer, and kind of really gets me into trauma, right? Like what you said, it's not
Mm.
so much what happens to you, it's not the substance you take in, it's what happens inside of you, and the response to it.
Yeah.
And that's really what we kind of was interested in initially, with the food relationship. If food is not like a chemical substance in that essence, like a pharmaceutical drug or a substance, how would you say, you can start to notice, am I having a dysfunctional food relationships, um, in terms of cravings, or the way I'm eating, or the way I'm relating to food? At what point can I start to notice, as a non-professional, that I might be having some imbalances, or altered food relationship, for lack of a
Yeah.
better word?
Yeah. There is a distinction between disordered eating and eating disorders. Disordered eating may imply that I've developed certain habits, certain patterns that may cause, for example, weight gain, or that may affect me biologically, health-wise. However, I'm able to, for example, adapt to following a healthy eating plan, and I can move forward. An eating disorder is similar to substance use disorder in that there's a change in the brain that has taken place, or there are underlying factors. And then, in addition to that, there are various chemicals at play. If you can sort of put them into two basic categories, there are the so-called feel-good chemicals, we refer to as neurotransmitters, and they are um, chemicals that make me experience certain feelings, a feeling of connection, a feeling of happiness, a feeling of euphoria, a feeling of well-being. And then the other category are the stress hormones, which are an indication that there is stress, there's unresolved trauma, there's worry, there's anxiety, there's concern. And food contributes in a major way to the release of certain neurotransmitters anyway. Another simple example, I'm enjoying my favorite meal and it was cooked for me. I didn't even have to prepare it. I absolutely love what I'm eating. That implies there's a release of dopamine. There's a pleasurable experience. I'm really enjoying it. And at the end of the meal, or at some stage, I feel satisfied, and I think sort of I don't need to eat anymore because I'm not hungry anymore. Well, there's another chemical that was released, serotonin. I feel the sense of well-being. I feel contentment. I feel satisfied. And then, in addition to that, I had my meal with people I really care about. I feel the sense of connection. There's oxytocin release. So the simple act of eating can actually meet so many different needs.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. However, if I've got an underlying unmet need, and if I can again backtrack, you mentioned the word trauma, the essence, and there seems to be overwhelming research evidence for this, the essence of one of the most significant risk factors for any kind of addiction or substance use disorder or eating disorder is an unmet need, whether it be trauma related or deprivation, or there's a psychological, emotional, it could even be a physical unmet need. Now, food, as I said, releases so many different chemicals, can be such an intense experience. And I've often heard people say, for example, if I can go back to substances, when I used a stimulant, for example, cocaine, wow, for the first time in my life, I felt confident. The cocaine made me feel confident. No, the cocaine couldn't make me feel confident. The cocaine stimulated the release of certain chemicals that made me experience a feeling of confidence. Now, if I have unmet emotional needs, low self-worth, maybe trauma, food may meet that need for me. Now, different strokes for different folks. Not everybody will go the same route. But now I have these amazing emotional experiences while I'm eating. There's a sense of contentment, there's enjoyment. The risk factors based on my unmet needs may put me at risk now of developing an eating disorder, or at least initially disordered eating, which can result into eating disorder. And similar, to go back to your question, how may I know that there are risk factors? It's not always that evident, because I've heard people say, I enjoy food, or I enjoy alcohol, or I enjoy substances. And that may be true, that there is no real risk for a disorder or addiction. But if there is a gradual increase in certain risk factors, factors and certain signs and symptoms as well. It could be I continue to gain weight, my health is being impacted. I've been diagnosed with at least the onset of diabetes for that matter. Those are obvious signs. And also my level of control. I'm less able to change the behavior. It's almost like I feel stressed or I feel anxiety when I think about changing my eating habits for that matter, going onto a diet. I don't believe in diets, but let's use that word. I believe in healthy eating plans, but just the consideration of a diet. So I move from the particular behavior that release all those chemicals that made me feel amazing, and just considering changing it releases stress hormones. And in the body and the brain, and I'm sure you guys understand this, there's this constant process of homeostasis, the balance between the various functions. And technically speaking, at most of the time, there is a slightly higher level of stress hormones than the feel good chemicals because I'm alert, I'm focused, I pay attention. When I go into a meditation, mindfulness practice, or I enjoy a meal, it reverses. There are more feel good chemicals present. So now, just the thought of I recognize there are potential problems and I'm at least considering making a change can increase the stress hormones
Mm,
because there's a conditioned part in my brain that I've trained. This behavior is serving me. The rational brain plays a less significant role. Rational, I may understand I need to consider a change. There are certain warning signs, but the conditioning or the conditioned part of the brain, which includes the survival part of the brain and the emotional part of the brain, as I said earlier, can start to sabotage them because they are largely irrational. If they could be rational, the belief would be why change this behavior? You've done it for so long. How are
mm,
you going to cope changing this? And it always tries to bring you back on the pleasant or the positive experiences. So it's really more awareness and very often more feedback from others who maybe see more than what I'm seeing because denial obviously plays a role as well. I will continue to rationalize, justify, minimize. And those are sort of potential warning signs. However, I make it sound easier than it is. It sometimes takes some kind of a rock bottom experience or some kind of risk or some kind of major warning sign to help me to recognize that. So if I remain open minded on feedback, but then again, some of the underlying uh, uh, causes or unmet needs may interpret the feedback as criticism, which can even exacerbate the whole situation. So it's hugely complex
mm.
and complicated for that matter.
Yeah, definitely. And that's very many aspects that you bring into that with the behavior and the reward and the unmet needs. And there's many ways to look at it. And the way that we have approached it many times is definitely with somatic practices,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
To work with that part of the brain, like you said, the survival states, to really help the brain start to feel safe. Like you said, maybe when someone took cocaine, that was the first time they felt confidence because of a chemical stimulation in the brain. How would you say the use of somatic tools play a role in working with a food dynamic like this, or a food relationship, or if someone starts to notice that I might have a food dependency or imbalance?
I would say it's imperative. We use quite a lot of that kind of approach at the treatment center as well. Just going back for example, trauma. Trauma is literally stored in the body. So if I have a trigger and what we refer to as a trauma response, it is more a visceral physiological reaction. And then in addition to that, obviously the thoughts or the intrusive thoughts that may follow and the emotional reaction. And when it comes to food particularly, there's a physical reaction. I feel physically comfortable or uncomfortable if it exceeds a certain limit. So it's imperative to not only use brain processes or cognitive processes with regards to therapy, but to absolutely include the body as well, because the psychosomatic principle, it used to be viewed as a negative thing, but it's a science. The body and the mind are directly connected. If I affect some changes cognitively, it affects the body. If I affect some changes from a physiological perspective, it impacts the mind. There's something called sorry, there's a certain coaching. The word has eluded me now. It'll come back. But a certain coaching where, if we use CBT as a therapy for that matter, it implies that if I change my thinking, I can impact the chemical reactions. I can impact my state. I can feel better. The reverse also applies. Sometimes I'm so overwhelmed with intrusive thoughts or emotions, I need to start with the body. So once I can find ways to make my body feel more relaxed, that has an impact on my mental state, can also impact the cognitive aspect of it. So 100%. So you refer to retraining the brain, or if I can put it in even more simplistic terms, getting the brain's buy-in that this behavior is okay. John is going to be okay. Because the unknown of how are you going to cope is very real to that conditioned part of the brain. So including certain practices from a physiological point of view can also bring some sense of relief that can have a huge impact on the cognitive therapeutic process as well. So the question may be, which is more important? I don't think we can even quantify that. They're both equally important. Depending on the person, depending on some of the causes, there may be the consideration, maybe where do we start? You know? But eventually to incorporate both the psycho and the somatic approaches is absolutely imperative.
Amazing. And yes, I mean, Sarah, you run into this a lot, you know, with the food dynamics, and since you work a lot with helping people to clean the body with healthy nutrition, we don't use the word diet either because
Yeah.
it's has a trigger in it. So we talk more nutrition. What would you say, Sarah, that you've seen in terms of unbalanced food dynamics, right? Like, what is the signs that you start to see usually?
I mean, I would say that the food dynamic overall is very unhealthy in society. So it almost
Absolutely.
like most people are walking around with a relationship to food that some people is not even aware of until you start to, as I really enjoy what you said, like the thought of changing my nutrition, or that it's being removed, or that it's being changed in any way, then it starts to come to the surface. I mean,
Yeah.
we also have this um, saying that people say, "Oh no, I can't do a detox. I can't fast. I can't do anything with my nutrition because if I don't eat, I get hungry." Uh, and we say that no, when you get hungry, I get angry. They say I get angry, and we
Yes.
say no, you have anger and you suppress it with food.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
this is usually quite a big revelation for people, that it's connected, and
Yeah.
that the anger is so connected to the food. And what we see is that people are suppressing their emotions. I mean, you don't even have to have addictions or severe issues, but what we see is that most people who have some sort of emotional imbalance or health imbalance, there is something that is related to the food, and that they use it for the feeling of comfort, the feeling of safety, and the feeling of grounding, because it affects all of it, as you have described.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
No, no, definitely. What comes to mind with you talking like that is, if I can just take a slightly different direction. Um, we use the terminology approach valence behavior versus withdrawal valence behavior. And in simple terms, it implies, what am I focusing on? And at the risk of offending some people, I do not like the word abstinence. I understand the meaning behind it. I understand the principle, but abstinence reminds me of what I'm going to have to give up, what I need to get away from. And that is very often the thinking when it comes to any kind of recovery. I can no longer do this. I have to change my eating habits, meaning I can no longer eat this. And that can be very, very stress inducing and be completely counterproductive in the recovery process. Whereas approach balanced behavior is, I focus on what am I moving towards, what are some of the benefits, what will be good for me. And it requires a whole paradigm shift, because conventional therapy was always, well, my understanding was always more focused on trying to solve the problem, trying to get away from behavior, trying to, with another terminology that really irritates me is the whole idea that it takes 21 days to break a habit. There is no, there's no logic in the statement. You do not break a habit. You replace it with a new habit. You repattern. It may take 21 days, that's irrelevant. So it's more about in the therapeutic process to try and convey the message, what the benefits are, what I want to move towards. I want to, it's less about stopping using substances. I want to develop new patterns, new behaviors that can still meet those needs for me. I want to experience peacefulness. I want to experience contentment. I want to experience physical health. And that's where the challenge sometimes comes in, is the conditioned beliefs when I think about using the word diets, or I think about abstinence, or I think about recovery. And if you talk to anybody for that matter, 90% of the time the focus is on what I'm going to have to give up. That's enough to make anybody feel discouraged or hopeless. So when it comes to food, as I think we also indicated, is we understand what causes some of these, the disordered eating, that there is some payoff, there is some reward. There's nothing wrong with the reward. Number one, and number two, there are unmet needs. And my personal approach is very much, apart from CBT, DBT related as well, is about normalizing and validating. There's a reason why you feel the way that you do. It's less about there's something wrong with me, I have to change the behavior. I don't want to talk too much about some of the therapies, but one of the principles that we use a lot in DBT is one of the root causes for some of the conditions that are treated in DBT is an invalidating environment. It implies unmet emotional needs, not being recognized, not being seen, not being validated. Now, if I approach a client and I'm telling them what they're doing wrong, I mean, I've sabotaged the whole process. So it's about validating there's a reason why you have developed these behaviors or these patterns. Under certain circumstances and conditions, that's normal. Let's look at what would be a preference. Now, what is this better quality of life maybe that you're longing for? Just the fact that anybody asks for help implies they realize there is a different way, or a better way. And then use the positives from the old behavior. What was that need that was met? The effort to meet the need is not the problem. It's maybe the ways or the means or the patterns that developed. And the only reason why we can even refer to it as disordered eating is because of the consequences or the results. So the validating, the normalizing, and look at the way forward, how can we go about, or what can be done to meet the same needs, to provide the same kind of whatever the relief or the confidence may be. And again, I make it sound very easy. It's a long-term process. Now, bringing the somatic side is imperative. So if I can start to feel better physically with some of the approaches that you guys use, and I included the cognitive therapeutic side, and sometimes pharmacotherapy in extreme cases where it's necessary. But that combination absolutely, it definitely contributes to solution-focused approach.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Focus on the solution, not the problem. That's definitely a philosophy we have here as well, that people are so focused on what I have to give up, and kind of what you focus on, you will enforce, and you will drive yourself towards that aspect. So I really like that you highlight that quality, right? That you can actually focus on what is it that I want, not what is it that I don't want, right? Sure, I might get rid of something, but what is it that I actually want, and how is this behavior holding me back from actually reaching there? So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a very important quality.
Yeah,
Definitely.
because people are not looking to just stop eating unhealthy or stop using any substance or be sober. It's more, I mean, you want a quality of life and
Yeah.
something that, I mean, something that is completely different. It's not just about
Absolutely.
stopping, it's about exchanging it to something that is actually working and that is a meaningful life and maybe have a life purpose and enjoying
Yeah.
life, not just stop whatever it is that is unhealthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the term we use in DBT is actually to develop a life worth
Yeah.
living, as you're indicating.
Mm.
Mm.
You know, and some of the CBT tools, just how I can change my thinking to feel at least less overwhelmed, to be able to move forward, and then all the other approaches.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Other-
I'm very grateful for the whole evidence-based approach that has become that is used more and more. And the evidence-based approach, first of all, is person-centered. There is no one-size-fits
Mm.
all. Where is the client at? What are some of their underlying causes? What approaches will work for them?
Yeah.
It is solution-focused. Yes, we recognize the problem, obviously, but we focus on how do we move towards the solutions the client identifies.
Mm.
It's recovery focused. I want to get better. It's not abstinence
Yeah.
focused. It's about the ability to move on. So again, that holistic view.
Mm.
In that whole model, we can include all these various approaches that contribute towards the kind of paradigm.
Yeah, that's beautiful. In the practice, one of the practices I work with, TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises, we call it follow the organism, right?
Yes,
I will
absolutely.
follow what the nervous system comes in, the history, what the person is ready to work with. I can't impose a framework and say, I know better than you. You're going to do
Yeah,
this because we're going to have this sympathetic dominance, right? It's going to be like a parent trying to tell a child, and
yeah,
there's going to be another set of interaction happening there.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, and I've seen that many times, right? Growing up, in school, and I was practicing martial arts myself for many years. So that's kind of what got me into wanting to learn more about behavior science and working with people in general. Like, I didn't really like that approach, right? Someone is just
yeah,
imposing their will on you, and like, nope, you
absolutely.
don't know better. I know better than you, and you should do this. And I don't. Yeah, maybe it works for someone, but I haven't met anyone that it really works for that makes someone empowered yet.
Absolutely. Well, it goes back to one of the basic core human needs for self-determination and autonomy.
Mm.
Um, in some of my presentation in particular, I often use the example, you try and tell a 2-year-old to do something they don't want to do or not to do something they want to do. How do they react? And sometimes that 2-year-old is labeled as disobedient and naughty. Well, from a cognitive point of view, it's not possible for the child to be disobedient and naughty because they're reacting to their autonomy being questioned
Yeah.
or their self-determination.
Mm.
Whether you're 2 or 52, there's a similar reaction.
Yeah.
Whether you impose it on me or I'm trying to impose it on myself, there's a similar reaction.
Yeah.
So bearing that in mind and presenting in such a way that there's buy-in, there's understanding, it changes again, the whole paradigm.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analogy. You just had a realization as you were saying it, so very good, right? Yeah, definitely. But it feels like it comes down to we had another guest talking about more human dynamics, right? Like we
Yes,
we we talk about substances, we talk about food and addictions, but it really comes down at the end to how you relate to yourself and what kind of means, tools am I conditioned with or used to working to feel
yeah,
good, and what resources do I have to feel good. And when there's trauma
yeah,
involved, there might be impairment of learning. I thought this was what everyone did because this is what happened in our family,
yeah,
and then I come out to the world and I realize that's not always the case.
absolutely. Yeah, and just accept that is normal. If I can just use a personal example, I know how relevant it is, but relating to that, I remember I was probably about 18, 19, and my best friend was telling me how much he loved his brother. And I couldn't assimilate the concept.
Mm.
I didn't know that family members could love each other because it's not about how I grew up, but that became normal. And to be exposed to a different way of thinking was quite overwhelming.
Mm.
So just to introduce that there are better ways to experience life, there are different ways of doing things. So I don't know if I'm making sense
Yeah.
and sort of how I relate
Yes.
to that.
Mm.
Yeah.
No,
And
definitely.
people
And
just
that's
think what they're experiencing is normal or the way they
Yeah.
were raised is
Yeah.
normal. And yet at some level they realize there's something
Yeah.
missing. There is something better. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what we experience all the time in the center, that when someone is approached with something, let's say we give someone a feedback, and it can be an honest feedback, but we deliver it quite straight, but it's calm and it's still loving and compassionate, and there is no animosity in it. And we have had
Mm.
people break down and cry and go, wow, I didn't know you could have this kind of interaction, and that there was no fighting, no screaming, no shouting. It literally, like you said, literally changes the brain. The brain doesn't understand what's going
Yeah,
on because it has never seen this happen. So
and
yeah,
you
that's a
create a
beautiful lesson.
validating environment for that
Mm.
client.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
amazing. Okay.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Do you have more questions, Simba?
No, I think those were the ones that I had, and it was very elaborate. So, I'll probably go back and even look at this myself and really, just soak it in and yeah, just take in. It was a lot of good information, right? And I like that you use practical examples too, because I usually go into teaching mode as well and just talk about, all the mechanism, and you tend to lose people. But when I like that you used examples, because that really makes it tangible for people that
Yeah,
might
so
have
people
not
can relate
studied
to it.
or not
Yeah,
into the field. It really makes it relatable, like you said. I can
yeah,
relate to this, and I can normalize that behavior and validate it.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So, if people are interested in knowing more about you, where do they find you? You said the Dawn in Chiang Mai.
Yeah, the Dawn Wellness Center and Rehab in Chiang
Yeah,
Mai. And if I can give you my email address,
yeah.
work email address, john.smith@thedawnrehab.com.
Thank you.
And my name is John Smith, by the way.
Thank you so much.
So more than welcome.
Thank you. It was an honor having you, and really, really good information. And I am sure all of the listeners will enjoy listening to this and probably have some aha moments and go, oh, okay, that's what's going on, and have it more relatable to them.
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity. It's always awesome to speak to like-minded people.
Thank you
That
so
is great.
much. And if anyone is more interested in about what we do here at Living with the Spirit, you can visit our website, livingwiththespirit.com. And any questions, you can just reach out on any social media or anywhere. We are everywhere. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everyone. And yeah, see you next
Thank
time.
you. Sawadee krap.
Sawadee
Sawadee
krap.
krap.